Hey everyone, time for part 2 of the 2AR-FXE build, going from hybrid to high performance. And today, might seem a little simple on the surface, but essentially, normally when you time a motor, you've got a timing chain here, and you've got a yellow mark here, and a red mark, and the exact marks will vary from motor to motor, and then on this one, you've got the timing mark right here and the timing mark right here. But here's the thing. With this motor, we can't just put the yellow piece of chain here right at the timing mark because this is an Atkinson cam. And this thing is going to be opening way too late. So we want to open it a little bit earlier. And we got to figure out how many. So the intake should be relatively easy. It's either going to be 2 or 3 teeth over. The exhaust is, I don't know. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the intake, kind of get this, get a little bit practiced, and then we'll work on the exhaust next. So what we're going to do is I'm going to install the timing assembly, and I will go ahead, since I have a best guess on this, I will install it at the correct position. And I will install one of the rockers, and just one, because I don't want a whole bunch of friction to move the engine around. Then I will install a giant timing wheel. Why my timing wheel is this large, I don't know. I bought this thing like 20 years ago. I thought it was necessary to have one this big back then. It isn't. Get a small one. But either way, that's the one that I have. So we're going to install that on the motor, time it to top dead center, and everything's going to be done on cylinder 1, of course. And then, yeah, we're going to see kind of where the cam lands. I've got some numbers for the 1AR that I just built, not only where my center lines are, but how much I moved by. And we can also unlock the cam to figure out exactly what our motion is. And the goal is, so these cams are just a tiny bit smaller than what I put on that motor, but these are VVTi wide solenoids, so they actually go about 20 degrees wider. So we should be able to cover what the 1AR does from its earliest valve open to its latest valve closed, because this solenoid is even wider. Plus, I wasn't even using the full range. The normal intake gear will move 50 degrees, and I was only using 40 degrees of it. And the normal exhaust gear will move 40 degrees, and I was only using 25 of it. Plus, on the exhaust side, there's going to be some trickiness on top of the fact that the timing mark is nowhere near where it needs to be. Because I made a decision, I'm not going to put an exhaust VVTi solenoid on here. I'm going to leave this intake solenoid because it's just easier. And the only problem is it's going to make it hard to start. So we're going to have a bunch of extra motion in this gear. So once we figure out what our range is, we'll then have to make a decision for where to put this to make it easiest to start. And essentially, to make it easiest to start, we want this to open as early as possible. Of course, that's complicated by the fact that the rest position for an intake cam is as late in its range as possible. So we're going to have to narrow down the available range to use to compromise between being able to start and being able to get max power. Well, no. To be able to start and to be able to idle, because max power is actually somewhere between the two of those. So, yeah, either way. So at this point, let me pull the spark plugs out, and then I'm going to install the cams with one rocker on the intake side only, and the timing assembly, and we'll see you in a second. So plugs actually look like they might be gapped a little bit small, but they're actually in pretty good shape. I'm going to check the heat range on these, make sure that it matches what the 2AR-FE needs. check the gap, and I'll probably just run these. There's nothing wrong with these. So here's what we got. We got a dial indicator on the valve that's actually moving. We've got the cam here in the position. Okay, so the dots are lined up, so it's locked. The yellow line was 2 advanced, so 2 clockwise. Yeah, 2 clockwise from where it should have been. And the red mark down here was at the right place. Now, this needle here isn't actually at top dead center yet. That's the first thing we got to do, is we got to find the top dead center. So I put an extension in there, and it's at a level that I can measure right now, and I'm going to go until it gets back to that level. I'll see how much this has traveled, and halfway through there will be top dead center. Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that easy a math. So that means that we'll go back to 90. That was our top dead center. And then we will reset our wheel to 0, and then it'll be indicated properly. All right, so obviously that is tough to tighten without getting this thing to move. But now that we're close, what we're gonna do, I'm gonna set it at 90, make sure that my height's right, set it at 90, make sure my height's exactly the same. If that's the case, then we'll be at 0. Otherwise, we can just adjust this one way or the other a little bit. Okay, 91. So this is probably going to be 89. And we're only going to be off by 1 degree. Okay, looks like 88. So that means then put it 1.5 degree. Yeah, okay. Put it 1.5 degree past that. Yeah, I'm not going to subject you guys to that. Other than setting the pointer at the right location, this all goes off the rails. I end up needing to sleep on it, and we'll pick back up the next morning. All right, so today is the next day, and this is wrong. What happened is I had this all written as just a whole bunch of numbers, and the problem is some of these numbers are in crank angle, some of them are in cam angle, and it's just a bunch of numbers. And the problem is, it's easy to get confused about what's after top dead center or before top dead center. So I'll actually just pop it up on your screen here, but what I have here is an actual graph of what we're doing. So you can see the taller profile here is what we had in the 2AR-FXE that was reground. We were using 40 degrees of VVTI there. And thankfully, since we're using the wide VVTI, we've got 50 degrees. So you can see what I'm aiming for is actually going to be to place the angles so that we can cover the entire span that we had before, even though the previous cams were actually just a little bit wider. And speaking of that, actually, here's another graph. And you can see here, this is the 3 cam profiles. This is the 2AR-FXE stock and that's the one that's the smallest and has that high peak there. Then you can see the reground 280 that I had done, and you can see that's kind of bigger everywhere. But then here's the hybrid one you can see, and this hybrid one, it's not really doing it justice to call one a 260 versus the reground calling them 280s. That makes them sound like they're very different. But this hybrid cam here, it's so aggressive on that initial ramp up that the duration, once you go to a slightly higher lift value, you know, where it matters, it doesn't actually matter where you start opening the valve. It's actually got a much longer duration than that stock cam. So now, of course, you can see the lift kind of peters out, but that's good and bad for us. So the bad is obviously less lift equals less flow. Now, more lift is usually diminishing returns on flow, so it's not as big of a loss as it appears here, but it is still a loss. And the other nice thing about it is, you see how that hill on the top, how it crests over the top, that's a smoother transition than especially that stock one where it's kind of a sharp point. And it's smoother still than even the reground cam. And what that means is we'll be able to spin this thing at a higher RPM. So with those stock cams, these valve springs had control for 7,200 RPM. I bet you with the stock valve springs, with these cams on both sides, we'll be able to run 75, 7,600 without any concern of valve float. So a little side benefit. Hopefully this thing actually makes power up there. We'll find out when we get to the dyno. But first things first, let's take this diagram here that I made, and I'm going to take these angles. So I'm going to erase all of this, and I'm going to put the right angles on it. So the pointer's at the right place, but everything else is wrong. Let's do that right now. All right, now this gives us a better idea to work from. Now, these marks here, this is my advanced mark. This is the retarded mark, which should be when this is locked. And don't worry, I'm screaming at myself too here. Yep, as careful as I was, I wrote lock on the wrong position. Lock is the further counterclockwise position, not the clockwise position. So what's about to happen here is I'm going to set the timing perfect, but to the wrong marks. So let's fast forward a bit. So the motor spins this way, right? Which means if we advance, we go this way. So why is my advance mark behind? Because if we're on the intake stroke, we're going to open the valve about here, come to the center line, and close our valve about here. We're going to draw just the locked position on here. So that's this curve right here. So we want at 125 degrees, I want this to be the center when it's locked. Then, since I had set it when it was advanced, that's why it was all wrong. So on this, since with this we got to go about 100 ahead, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this right here should be where we're locked when we're starting to lift the valve. So let's set it based on that. Okay, let's find the, oh, okay, that was right. Okay. Now let's move the cams until they start lifting. All right, so the locked position right now is 4 degrees ahead of our ideal, which is fine. Then does this look about like the center? It does look about like the center, and let's go until we're at 50 thousandths lift on the other side. This is 50 thousandths lift on the other side. Which is there, which is lock. Yeah, see, this is going over the marks that I had before. What I thought was the advanced position was actually the locked position. And I had written it on there. See, it says lock right here. All right, now if we advance the cam, which we will to test things, that means what's happening here should be happening 50 degrees earlier. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So this will be advanced, which will then place our center line 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Advanced center line, and 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. This should be our advanced close, which this one we won't actually be able to measure because of the way the valve works. But all right, so let's get through there. All right, let's unlock that and advance it. Dots are no longer aligned, and that's as far forward as it goes. So now let's see where it starts to open. And I'm holding pressure on it with the wrench so that it doesn't slide back. Okay, there's 50 thousandths. Oh, right there. It's finally where it's supposed to be. Okay, so let's put it about in the center. This I don't have a super good way to measure. That's about centered. Oh, hey, that is centered. Great. Okay, so then we're going to go a little bit past and go until there's 50 thousandths. There. So our advanced mark. Okay, within 5 degrees. That's there's enough. Yeah, that's okay. All right, so now this, the intake cam relative to the crank, they are in the correct relative position. Now, the tricky part is this red link here that you may not be able to see right now, I need to get that lined up with the crank so that I can tell, because the whole idea we're trying to get is where do we need to align the yellow mark against this when we're timing the motor so that we can do it again once we figure out what the exhaust is. So this will take a little bit. Oh, did I say it would take a little bit? we got lucky here. So it's 1 tooth ahead of the mark. So that means if we, no, sorry, the mark is ahead by 1 tooth. So we would have to rotate the chain 1 tooth this way, which would place this right here. All right, and to show you guys what that is. All right, so our intake 2AR-FXE cam, to give it the right position, we need to go 1 tooth. Originally, I had said it needed to go 2 teeth, so to this one instead of this one, but the problem is here is there's 360 teeth here, so I assumed that they were 10 degrees apiece, but did I say 360? They're 36 teeth, so I assume 10 degrees apiece, but that one down there, which is what counts the crank angle, has 18. So each one of these teeth is 20 degrees. So we have advanced, by going this way, by 20 degrees, the intake cam relative to the 2AR-FXE. All right. Now, I'm sorry if that sounded really complicated. It took me way too long to get that right. So, whatever. Next, instead of fumbling in the dark again, I'm going to go ahead and just make this diagram for the exhaust. It'll be on screen in a second when I come back. All right, now I've got the exhaust one prepared. You can see it right here. There's a couple differences with this one here. First, you'll see the FXE cams that we're putting in are much further apart. So what I put on the drawing for the reground cams is I didn't put the range that they can do. Instead, I put the range that I used. So the reground cam furthest on the left is where the locked position is. And then we move about 25 degrees. And interestingly, I didn't notice this until now, but what that does, so the stock cam advances actually about 35 degrees or so, and it places the closure line exactly at the same spot of where the stock closes. So there's probably a clue there, right? This motor doesn't want that exhaust valve closing any later than that. So then I took that hint, and I put the FXE cam at the same location, but the tricky part, so the reason this is going to be hard to start, because we've got dual intake instead of intake and exhaust, is the locked position on this will be the one that's on the far right instead of the one that's on the left. So the drawing that I made for the one on the left is just the 50 degrees that this allows. I don't think I'll ever need to go that far. It just doesn't make sense to have your exhaust valve closing that early, but it shows the range. Now, the advantage that buys us, since we don't need to use the whole range to the left of that graph, is if we can't, because this only gives us 20 degree accuracy, if we can't match it exactly, what we'll do is we'll just take the whole thing, we'll shift it a little bit to the right and see if that helps. Helps us achieve kind of, we basically want that window for the FXC to be able to cover the entire window of the reground cams. And if possible, if there's extra, we want to push it as far to the left as possible, because that's what's going to allow us to, I realize I just pointed on the right, far to the left as possible. And that's what's going to allow us to start easier. But again, we're not going to have that much adjustability in here. We got pretty lucky on the intake side. Let's hope for some luck. So I got to move all this. I got to move the rocker now so that it's actuating the exhaust valve so I can measure that. And I got to move this measuring equipment to the other side. So it'll take a second here, but I'll be right back. Okay, never mind. That's all wrong. That's all wrong. In fact, it might be so wrong that it might actually be somewhat correct. Motor spins this way, and I was trying to make it so that this was about to close, right? So we're at top dead center-ish. So this is supposed to be about to close, but it's actually about to open. Oh, hold on a second. Oh. Oh, okay, okay. I can't actually time it there because that would put this cam 360 degrees off. So in this position here, with these up, we are at TDC, and we're supposed to be about to open our intake valve. Sorry. Let me go through the rotation here. So right now, this is our compression stroke. This should be our exhaust stroke. This is our intake. Okay, which that's where the cam's at. And then this should be our exhaust. But our exhaust valve is opening now. Well, somewhere around 200 degrees too late. Okay. So we just need to rotate this about 180 degrees. All right, let's do that. We're actually going to go around the other way so we don't have to skip the lobe there, but same difference. Aha, okay, there it is. So is that tooth aligned? Okay, so that tooth's aligned down there. That's on the mark here. And that's on the mark there. So let's see, relative to the timing mark. It's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so this one moves 11 to the right, and this one moves 1 to the right. And best I can tell, that's our motor timed. All right, let's do a final disassembly so that we can put those rockers back in and then reassemble the motor. So here we're just cleaning off that gasket. And more gasket cleaning here. I went ahead and tilted the engine so that I don't get stuff in the engine there. Don't forget to clean the O-ring spots. And put the timing assembly back in with those numbers that we figured out earlier. So intake 1 notch over and exhaust 11 notches over. Make sure everything rotates properly. Don't forget to put your oil pump gaskets in. And yeah, here, just cleaning timing cover and RTV on there. And then torque the cover back on. The little fasteners here get 20 and the bigger ones get 35. Crank pulley. And then don't forget those O-rings on top. And then the valve cover. Again, 20 foot-pounds up here. And then I'm going to re-gap those spark plugs. I'm opening them up to 40 thousandths of an inch, or about 1 millimeter. And then finally, we just want to clean those mounting surfaces so that this thing doesn't, have an exhaust leak. I also end up getting the intake side, but that's not on video. All right, so I finished this off camera. The battery ran out. Sorry about that. But at this point, we have polished this hybrid. We've turned it into a regular motor, no longer Atkinson, with a long duration intake and exhaust cam and 12.5 to 1 compression ratio. So this thing should run on premium pretty well. And I guess we'll find out in a couple days here, hopefully. Well, okay, it might be a week, but what's the number we're going to get out of here? I feel pretty confident that 280, 290 is, because let's see, if I pull up that graph again here, do you see the fact that the intake is 260 degrees instead of the regrind that was 280 doesn't really do it justice, because you can see the hybrid, the FXE cams, they ramp up faster. So where you're at a point in the curve where it matters, it's almost the same width. Now, there's not as much lift at the top, and that will affect things, but lift is not as important here as duration. And of course, we're going to gain 8 to 10% more horsepower just from the compression bump. So the 8% we're going to lose to a displacement change is going to be made up by the compression ratio. And yeah, either way, I think we're going to get 10 to 20 horsepower more than what we had, probably closer to 10. So, which should give us, right at this end here, 280 to 290. So I'm pretty excited about that. And yeah, so I guess that means tomorrow I got to bring the race car back in the shop and I got to change the motor in it yet again. It's been happening a lot lately. Thankfully, it's not because the motor's blown up, though. Yeah, either way, it'll be out and in a day. I can't wait to drive this thing, so super excited. And the other thing I'm excited, man, you guys are just piling on the subscriptions lately. There's like almost, 4,300 of you guys now? It's awesome, guys. I really appreciate it. Well, we'll see you when I swap this motor. Have a good one, guys. Bye.